Hello, we are Tara
and MK,
a fellow podcast down the Yellow Brick Pod, and are so happy to be included in celebrating the MGM legacy. Thank you so much, Justin. Okay, so what does MGM's The Wizard of Oz mean to you?
The MGM film to me means childhood and reconnecting with being enchanted. I have a very clear memory of my aunt gifting me a VHS copy for Thanksgiving when I was really little, and once it was in the VCR, that's where it stayed. And I think that was the first time I felt I was under a spell and couldn't take my eyes off of something. Tara, what about you?
I think for me now, the MGM film reminds me that I can be responsible for recoloring my gray, for finding my unlikely rainbows, my allies, and Technicolor worlds, even when things are hard. It's really hard to sum up, but it's one of the few films I haven't gotten sick of ever, and I keep learning from. I keep creating traditions around, and I keep being enchanted by it.
May Oz continue to endure, and thanks again, Justin, for having us on.
Woo!
Welcome to the wonderful recap of Oz, where we explore L. Frank Baum's iconic book series and their countless film, television, stage, and literary adaptations. Sit back, put on your ruby slippers, or silver, whichever you prefer, and let's dive in.
To me, The Wizard of Oz is all about family and tradition. Watching the film is a ritual passed down through generations, whether that be the annual television broadcasts of years past or the on-demand streaming services of today. Beyond just the movie, Oz as a whole has been something passed down through my family. My grandmother gave me my very first Oz books, her personal copies from her own childhood, and I have continued that tradition by imparting love of both the books and the movie to my own daughters. And for a movie whose central premise is the desire to go home, what represents home more than family?
Nate Barlow, director and producer.
The MGM film for me is such a movie of nostalgia. I would run around the house saying there's no place like home. The design, the music, the cinematography, it really is a piece of art, and I am so glad that so many people have seen it. I read somewhere that it was like the most viewed movie of all time, and that just brings me so much joy. I could truly give you frame by frame, shot by shot of the film in my head, and I actually have done that in order to fall asleep before. It is such a place of love. I am just really thankful that I saw it when I was 2, and I've not stopped watching it. The Wizard of Oz for me is just a place of comfort and love and friendship and joy, and it is truly unlike any other movie I've ever seen.
Christopher Castanho, Oz Club member.
For me, The Wizard of Oz has always been very special. My grandma showed it to me when I was a young child, and my love for Oz only began to grow from there. We watched the film on repeat, I don't even know how many times, to the point where they were all sick of hearing it. My grandma used to tell me about how she watched the film growing up, and I could just sense the longing in her when we watched the film, that she had grown up in this small town in Kentucky that I was growing up in, and that she longed for that world that was full of color and crazy creatures. And it taught me to have the same aspirations in life, to just explore the world and get out of the small town that I was living in. And now Oz, watching that film, just kind of feels like a safe space that she created for me, and revisiting that space just kind of allows me to feel like I'm back with her again.
Tyler Varney, from The Legacy of Oz.
I
I first saw The Wizard of Oz when I was 8 years old. And for me, when I first saw it, it was the first example of a live action film where the visual really matched what I could see in my head, in my imagination. You know, when you see cartoons, you know, they're vivid, but you know that they're drawings on paper or they're images created on a computer. But The Wizard of Oz had that sort of grounding and realism of real life, and yet had this tremendous magic quality about it. So that when Dorothy was being swept over the rainbow to a place full of color and whatnot, and all these amazing characters were surrounding her, they didn't feel like fantasy. They didn't feel like they were artificial. They felt like they were legitimately happening. And I think that's what is really sort of resonating, especially as I get older, about that movie.
David Keyes, author of The New Oz Chronicles. After getting out of school, Dorothy Gale runs home to her Aunt Em and Uncle Henry's farmhouse. She tries to inform them and their farm hands of the abuse that was just inflicted on her dog Toto by their neighbor Miss Gulch. Unfortunately for Dorothy, everyone on the farm is too focused on their duties to pay close enough attention. Aunt Em brushes her off, insisting that Dorothy find herself a place where she won't get into any trouble. Alone with her canine companion, Dorothy fantasizes about such a place, imagining it could only exist over the rainbow. Enter Miss Elmira Gulch, who demands to speak with Aunt Em and Uncle Henry about Toto. Miss Gulch reveals that she's received an order from the sheriff to have the dog euthanized, since the aforementioned altercation ended with Toto biting her leg. With no other choice than to obey the law, Em and Henry surrender Toto to Miss Gulch. An upset Dorothy retreats to her bedroom in tears, but through her window jumps Toto, who has escaped from Miss Gulch's clutches. Dorothy concludes that nobody on the farm cares about her, so, to protect herself and her dog, she decides to run away. They stumble across a caravan owned by Professor Marvel, a less-than-authentic psychic with a sensitive heart. Using his charm, he's able to convince Dorothy that her aunt is unwell, urging her to go home where it is safe. She and Toto race back to the farm, as Professor Marvel spots a tornado off in the distance. With the cyclone fast approaching and Dorothy nowhere to be found, Aunt Em, Uncle Henry, and the farm hands are forced to retreat to the storm cellar without her. Dorothy finally does return, but finds the cellar is locked. After going inside the house, the strong winds knock a window pane loose, which strikes Dorothy on the head, knocking her unconscious. Dorothy wakes up to find the house has been lifted off the ground and is whizzing around inside the cyclone. She sees visions of debris, animals, and people through her window, culminating with the appearance of Miss Gulch on her bicycle. Before her eyes, Gulch transforms into a cackling witch on a broomstick. Just mere moments after, the cyclone dissipates and the house falls to the ground. Dorothy and Toto open the door to realize they're no longer in Kansas. Instead, they are surrounded by colorful plants, small round houses, and a road made of yellow bricks. A good witch by the name of Glinda floats from the sky to greet Dorothy. She explains that Dorothy's house has landed on the Wicked Witch of the East, killing her and relieving the Munchkins of their most antagonizing figure. Glinda summons the Munchkins, the locals, and they host a large celebration and shower Dorothy with praise and gifts. After a 6-minute celebratory musical sequence, their party is interrupted by the fiery arrival of the Wicked Witch of the West, sister of the deceased. She confronts Dorothy before shifting focus to her sister's ruby slippers. The witch approaches the house, but the shoes disappear in front of her. When she turns back, Glinda reveals that the shoes have magically appeared on Dorothy's feet. Recognizing that she can't oppose the power of the ruby slippers, she threatens Dorothy and disappears in a cloud of smoke. With Dorothy now more determined to get back home to safety, Glinda tells her to travel to the Emerald City to seek help from the Wizard of Oz. Glinda and the Munchkins bid Dorothy farewell as she skips along the yellow brick road. It isn't long before Dorothy finds herself at a crossroads in a cornfield. A scarecrow that's stationed nearby begins speaking to her. He seems just as confused as to where to go as she is, and he explains it's because he doesn't have a brain. Dorothy helps him escape from the pole he's nailed to and convinces him to travel with her to the Emerald City to ask the wizard for a brain. He happily agrees, even with the knowledge that a wicked witch may be actively pursuing Dorothy, and they continue along the road. They skip through an apple orchard and decide to steal some apples from some very defensive apple trees. This is when they stumble upon a man made out of tin. After using a nearby oil can to rescue him from the rust that binds him, he reveals the tinsmith who made him neglected to give him a heart. Of course, Dorothy and the Scarecrow are happy to bring him with them to see the wizard. Even after a brief run-in with the Wicked Witch of the West, the Tin Man is excited by the opportunity to have a heart. As they descend further into the dark forest, they are confronted by a ferocious lion. That is until Dorothy slaps him. He starts sobbing and reveals that he's actually very cowardly. He's sleep-deprived, scared of harmless creatures, and just desperately wants courage. Dorothy and her friends welcome the cowardly lion on their journey, but it isn't long before they come across some trouble. The Wicked Witch has been watching Dorothy through her crystal ball. Seeing that she's gained reinforcements, the witch casts a spell on a nearby poppy field, which will cause the travelers to fall asleep. Sure enough, Dorothy and the lion quickly fall ill to the poppy's effects, but they're rescued by a sudden snowstorm conjured by Glinda. The snow dampens the witch's spell, and her previously helpless victims carry on. Arriving at the gates of the Emerald City, Dorothy identifies herself and explains that their journey has received the blessing of Glinda. They receive a warm welcome from the residents, are treated to a tour of the city, and cleaned up after their long journey. Their joyous arrival is interrupted by the Wicked Witch, taking to the skies to request the surrender of Dorothy. Panic spreads throughout the city, with only the Council of the Wizard as their only hope. After some convincing, Dorothy and her friends are granted admission to see the wizard. In the throne room, the wizard appears to them as a menacing, floating head. He states that he will only grant their requests if they prove they are worthy of his help. Their task? To obtain the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West. They reluctantly travel to the haunted forest to pursue the witch, but they are attacked by the witch's flying monkeys. They capture Dorothy and Toto and fly away, leaving the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion alone in the forest. After Dorothy is brought to the witch's castle, she tries to barter with the girl. She threatens her dog's life if she does not give up the ruby slippers. She tearfully agrees, but the magic of the shoes won't allow the witch to take them. In the chaos, Toto successfully escapes the castle and runs back into the forest. Seeing no other option, the witch now resorts to killing Dorothy, and leaves her in her cell while she makes preparations. Meanwhile, Toto guides the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion to the witch's castle, where they disguise themselves as her guards and sneak in. They find Dorothy and try to escape, but they are ambushed by the Winky guards. The witch sets fire to the Scarecrow's arm, forcing Dorothy to grab a nearby bucket of water to put out the fire. In the process, water spills onto the witch, melting her. The Winky guards rejoice since they no longer have to serve their wicked ruler, and they happily hand the witch's broom over to Dorothy. Dorothy and her friends return to the Emerald City and present the broomstick to the wizard. It's clear the wizard is surprised, and he tells them the matter requires more thought. He won't be able to grant their requests until the next day. His visitors immediately fight him on the matter, until Toto pulls back a curtain to reveal a man toying with some machinery. With his illusion broken, the man admits that he is the Wizard of Oz, and that he's been a fraud all this time. Even so, he helps the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion figure out that they had what they were looking for all along. With the three of them satisfied with their newfound brains, heart, and courage, Dorothy is unsure how a powerless wizard can transport her back to Kansas. The wizard tells Dorothy that he used to live in Kansas, and it may be in their best interest to get in a hot air balloon and travel back home together. In a public ceremony, it's announced that the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion will be taking over the wizard's duties of ruling over Oz as he returns to Kansas with Dorothy. But a rigging mishap causes the wizard's balloon to fly away early. He is safely inside, but Dorothy and Toto don't make it in time. With all her hopes lost, Glinda returns and reveals that Dorothy can use the ruby slippers to carry her home. Dorothy is overjoyed at this news, having learned some new lessons as a result of her days-long journey. She then tearfully bids goodbye to her companions, clicks her heels 3 times, and commands that the shoes bring her home. Dorothy wakes up in her bedroom in Kansas, attended by her aunt and uncle, the farmhands, and Professor Marvel. It's explained that she has been asleep this whole time, but Dorothy insists that her time in Oz was real. She even explains that the farmhands and the professor were in Oz with her, as they resemble her companions there. Regardless, she is grateful to be back in the company of her loved ones, and happily exclaims that there's no place like home.
It's a magical, glistening, glamorous movie. I've been watching it since I was 2 or 3 years old. It was my Frozen. I would play it 2 to 3 times a day, every day, have the album on, drive my mom absolutely insane, to the point where she eventually accidentally recorded over the movie, And still, even when I tried to get her to watch the 4K edition recently, she just can't bear to watch it anymore because it's been just too drilled into her. It's just magic. There's ruby slippers, gingham dresses, yellow brick roads, tin men, scarecrows, and fabulous music. And all in all, Judy Garland is just phenomenal in this movie. She acts her heart out and you feel every beat of her performance. And what a voice. It just has such a deep, magical place in my heart, and it's led on to so much more. For me, it has been quite literally life-changing. This is Colin Ayres of The Oz Connection.
I remember the first time I ever saw The Wizard of Oz was in preschool. I was 3 years old, and I remember liking the bright colors and the singing and the ruby slippers. But my very favorite part were the flying monkeys. And I was kind of a creepy kid. I am a creepy adult now. I love spooky things. But when I was 3 years old, I would go nuts every time the flying monkeys would come on the screen. And even now, when I watch the movie, I see those monkeys come on the screen, and all of a sudden, just deep down inside, I become that 3-year-old again.
Erica Oliveira of The Oz Connection.
I can't say what age I was when I first saw The Wizard of Oz, because as long as I can remember, during the holidays, if the movie was on TV, we would all stop what we're doing, sit down, and watch it. It wasn't until I was a freshman in high school that I was actually in a production of The Wizard of Oz that I came to appreciate, love, and grow with The Wizard of Oz. I played Uncle Henry and the guard at the Emerald City. It was my first production ever, and I just was so honored and amazed to be included amongst such talented people, and to do a show, to tell a story that had been told back in 1939 on the silver screen. I always have these beautiful, happy memories of being with my friends in costume behind the set, just having a really good time, being together, and just the importance of having really good friends. Because, life is sometimes very scary. It's sometimes scarier than a tornado. It's also a beautiful thing. And Dorothy's journey is truly a journey of a lifetime. And something that The Wizard of Oz told me is that when you go on a journey, especially if it's the journey of a lifetime, bring friends, because it's important to have friends. And I even had the movie when I didn't really have any friends.
OzRoy Chase, enthusiast.
Hi, I'm Josh, and The Wizard of Oz is my favorite piece of media ever. Dorothy's journey of self-discovery is so relatable, and being a friend of Dorothy myself, I dress up as her when I march in Pride. My favorite character, though, is the Wicked Witch, mostly due to the Broadway show Wicked, but even before then, Margaret Hamilton's iconic performance is just stuck with me. From the books to the movies, to The Wiz, to Wicked, and beyond, Oz always feels like home, and there's no place like home.
Josh Lanning, artist. As promised, the second season of the Wonderful Recap of Oz will be delving into the differences between the books and their numerous adaptations. When I share my thoughts on the film, musical, television series, or book, I'll be thinking about two main things: its quality as an adaptation, and its quality overall. Now, Oz fans will tell you different things depending on who you ask. Some people will say this is a poor adaptation of Baum's book that ruined all adaptations moving forward. Others will say it improves the Baum book by eliminating some of the pacing issues and making it more cinematic. I tend to agree with the latter. This movie doesn't change a lot. Most of the changes in the screenplay come from what they choose to omit from the source material, and there is a lot of content in the source material. In the movie, you won't find any of the following: hammerheads, Kalidas, specific colors for each region of Oz, a Munchkin feast offered by Bach, the Tin Woodman's backstory, field mice in a poppy field, a stork near a raging river, green spectacles, Jellia jam, the wizard's shape-shifting illusions, Gayelette's golden cap, the Wicked Witch's wolves, crows, and bees, a giant spider in the forest, or the dainty China country. I'm sure I'm forgetting some things, and you can restream my first episode if you need more elaboration, but the movie does add new elements. The characters of Hunk, Zeke, Hickory, Miss Gulch, and Professor Marvel and the scenes that revolve around them are original to this movie, and they certainly help establish Dorothy's character before she's carried to Oz. There are several other small details that have been revised. Dorothy is also reimagined as a girl in her early teens as opposed to a little girl, no older than 12 years old in the books. The silver shoes have been changed to ruby slippers to better utilize the Technicolor spectacle. The Good Witch of the North and Glinda the Sorceress are combined into one character. The Wicked Witch of the West now wears all black, has green skin, and carries a broomstick, as opposed to having an eye patch, an umbrella, and presumably naturally colored skin. When the witch captures Dorothy, she only takes the girl and Toto, allowing for the rest of Dorothy's friends to come to her rescue. In the book, she also captures a lion, and leaves the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman helpless in an extremely damaged state. But probably the biggest change has to be the implication that, in this movie, Oz is merely a figment of Dorothy's imagination. Something she dreamed of after getting knocked unconscious during the tornado. In the books, Oz is very much a real place. Yes, I suppose the ending of this movie is up for interpretation, but it's definitely not as concrete as Baum intended. And despite all of the changes, the story is not lost. It is still L. Frank Baum's Oz, just in movie format. As it stands as an adaptation, it also borrows devices from previous Oz adaptations. Having actors from Kansas portray characters in Oz is an element in the 1925 silent film starring Larry Seaman and Oliver Hardy. Ted Eshbaugh's cartoon from 1933 depicts Kansas in black and white, transforming to color once Dorothy arrives in Oz. My research can't verify if these allusions are intentional, but they are at least coincidental. And even with these Easter eggs, there is no denying that this film is the quintessential Oz adaptation.
Hi, I'm Karen.
And I'm Colleen.
And this is Books,
Movies,
and Musicals.
Oh my! Come join us as we discuss our favorite childhood stories in analytical and honest ways.
Most recently, we've been discussing Harry Potter and Disney princesses.
We have so many more ideas and we can't wait to go through them with you.
So, keep it magical.
And leave a little magic wherever you go. Bye!
Do you want to escape over the rainbow all the time? Ah, we see you nodding. If so, I'm Tara.
And I'm MK. And we are so happy to welcome you to Down the Yellow Brick Pod, a neighbor podcast of the wonderful recap of Oz that falls down many fascinating ruby red rabbit holes as we preserve and peel back the curtain on the wonderful world we all know.
Or thought we knew.
And love.
Think if NPR's On Being, Fresh Air, and Tiny Desk Concert suddenly collided and were given an Oz twist? That's totally our vibe.
Down the Yellow Brick Pod is available wherever you listen to podcasts, along with a Technicolor scrapbook on Instagram at Down the Yellow Brick Pod.
For a more intimate community experience with bonus content, virtual hangs, and monthly musical Oz coffee shop covers, come check out our membership tiers on patreon.com/Down the Yellow Brick Pod. For some Good Witch Trouble swag, shop our merch at etsy.com/shop/Down the YBP.
On behalf of all independent podcasters and artists, we thank you for listening and know these Ozian podcasts always value your support. Here's to celebrating the things that connect us and the things we love.
I want to give a shout out to my incredible Oz Recap patrons. I can't thank you enough for your kindness. Podcasting is really hard work, and it's so reassuring to have supporters like you. Our little wizards are Leslie Carnahan and Tara Tagliaferro, and we have quite the royal army consisting of Gothic Gargoyle, Tyler Varney, Jay, Kenneth Montfort, JRL Studios, and The Oz Connection. Not only do patrons assist in providing quality content, they are also entitled to exclusive bonus content not available anywhere else. That could include exclusive podcast episodes, behind-the-scenes videos, commentary tracks, and more. To become a patron, visit patreon.com/OzRecap.
I have loved The Wizard of Oz since I was a very small, very dramatic little gay kid in eastern Montana. My mother knew how much I loved the movie, and she would read the books to me, and she even got me a pair of white high heels because the Disney record adaptation I had, the silver shoes, looked white. And she knew how badly I wanted the ruby slippers from the movie. And I love The Wizard of Oz so much that when I finally had the chance to adapt it for the stage at the theater program I teach at Hellgate High School in Missoula, Montana, I wrote a fantastic adaptation that is available and very popular right now from theater folk. So I owe The Wizard of Oz quite a lot.
Laramie Dean, playwright.
MGM's Wizard of Oz was my first exposure to Oz, and it's a great, linear, streamlined adaptation of L. Frank Baum's story that works very well, I think, much as I love the original book. And it's great how, even though it's a film that was filmed all on a soundstage, that it draws you into this world with its wonderful artistry, the wonderful performances and music. If you know how the movie was made, you know that some things behind the scenes weren't so great, and in fact, some of it wasn't very nice, to paraphrase Dorothy there. But still, it all came together to make this wonderful film that we can all cherish and honor the people who made it, especially the ones who didn't quite come out unscathed.
Jay Davis from the Royal Blog of Oz.
Well, in being asked to think a little bit about what the original 1939 MGM film, The Wizard of Oz, has meant to me, of course it's meant a lot of things wicked, because even when I was a kid, I felt that there should have been a reprise to the song that Judy Garland sang, in which she might have reconsidered her ambitions to go someplace full of lemon drops, and she might have said and sung more wisely, "Somewhere over the rainbow, she's there too, dun-dun-dun-dun-dun, and the dreams that you're scared to dream really do come true."
Gregory Maguire, author of The Wicked Years. I've always taken The Wizard of Oz very seriously, you know. I believe in the idea of the rainbow, and I've spent my entire life trying to get over it. As for my feelings toward Over the Rainbow, it's become part of my life. It is so symbolic of all dreams and wishes that I'm sure that's why people sometimes get tears in their eyes when they hear it. Both quotes from Judy Garland. It may surprise you to know that the world premiere of the finished film took place 3 days before its Hollywood premiere, more than halfway across the country in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. The Hollywood premiere would be arguably more glamorous. On August 15, 1939, thousands of people gathered at Grauman's Chinese Theater, which was beautifully decorated with a Kansas cornfield scene and a stuffed scarecrow, with a yellow brick road in place of a red carpet. Representing the film at the premiere were actors Ray Bolger, Burt Lahr, Billy Burke, and Charlie Grapewin, along with celebrated creative crew members Mervyn LeRoy, Victor Fleming, Arthur Freed, Herbert Stothart, and Edgar Allan Wolfe. Other Oz stars in attendance included Fred Stone, who portrayed the Scarecrow in the highly successful Broadway musical, as well as Maud Gage Baum, widow of the author L. Frank Baum. This was an event she would cherish, calling it one of the greatest thrills of her life, and she praised MGM for maintaining the kindly philosophy from her husband's books. Judy Garland was not in attendance that evening, but she would leave her mark at Grauman's only 2 months later, when her hand and footprints would be immortalized in the cement outside the theater. Instead, Judy was with Roger Edens and Mickey Rooney on a touring act meant to promote the film. This concluded with a 3-week engagement at the Capitol Theater in New York, which started on August 17th. They were performing between 5 and 7 shows per day, and in the last week, Mickey Rooney went back to MGM, allowing Burt Lahr and Ray Bolger to step in. Even Jack Haley made an appearance on August 30th. These shows were very well attended and led to the film's New York premiere on September 6th. There are many beliefs that The Wizard of Oz was not successful with the critics or at the box office, and that's not true. While there were a few mixed and negative reviews, the majority of them were glowing and praised the film's achievements. Its initial film release garnered $3,017,000, breaking attendance records all across the country. It is true that the film didn't make a profit. It lost $750,000 at the box office. This is due to many different factors. The film had a very high budget, and approximately 1/3 of the audience for this film was made up of children, and their tickets were cheaper than the adults. Many foreign releases were cut off due to the start of World War II. And lastly, the Hollywood system was constantly releasing new films, so there was high demand for movie theaters to show new content. But despite the financial losses, MGM was thrilled with the film's success, seeing it as a triumph. Of course, it would eventually turn a profit later, but we'll talk about that in a few. It had one of the biggest openings in film history, was breaking records, and was a critical success. News outlets like the Los Angeles Times, the Los Angeles Herald-Express, and the Hollywood Reporter immediately recognized that The Wizard of Oz would be extremely influential. They referred to it as an important contribution to Hollywood, a milestone in motion picture history, and one of the greatest novelties ever offered on the screen. Despite these praises, the film was going up against some very strong competition at the 12th Annual Academy Awards. It was nominated for Best Picture, Art Direction, Original Score, Special Effects, and Song for Over the Rainbow. Other nominees for these categories included Wuthering Heights, Stagecoach, Of Mice and Men, Babes in Arms, which also starred Judy Garland and Margaret Hamilton, and Gone with the Wind, which was also directed by Victor Fleming. The ceremony took place on February 29, 1940. As expected, Gone with the Wind swept, winning 8 awards. The Wizard of Oz won in 2 categories, Original Score and Best Song. But that's not the only recognition the film would receive that night. In 1935, the Academy established a miniature statuette for exceptional work by a juvenile performer. It had previously been won by child stars Shirley Temple, Deanna Durbin, and Mickey Rooney. Rooney would present this award to his frequent co-star and close friend Judy Garland at this ceremony. Judy would be nominated for 2 Academy Awards later in her career, but this was the only Oscar she would receive. She was so grateful that she wrote a note to Mervyn LeRoy on a napkin, which read, "I owe you everything." The Wizard of Oz keeps coming back every year because it's such a beautiful film. I don't think any of us knew how lovely it was at first, but after a while we all began to feel it coming together, and knew we had something. I can watch it again and again and remember wonderful Judy, Bert, Ray, Jack, Billy, Frank, and how wonderful they all were. The scene that always gets to me though, and I think it's one of the most appealing scenes I've ever seen, is the one where the wizard gives the gifts to them at the end. Frank was just like that as a person, and every time I see him do it, the tears come to my eyes. I listen to the words, I think of Frank, and I know how much he meant what he said, and how much the words themselves mean. Margaret Hamilton.
I believe the Wizard of Oz film is one of the most important pieces of cinema ever created, and as far as musical theater goes, it is the original musical template that most people now rip off. I know that goes to Oklahoma more recently. However, I think this has a lot more traits of a classic musical than any of Roger and Hammerstein's early stuff. The filmmaking techniques are top-notch and uncomparable to anything of the time. It looks like it came out 20 years later than it did. It is timeless, it is effective, and it is emotionally gripping in a way that I have never seen before or since. And for me personally, it's a film I can return to every year and see something new to love and appreciate. While it wasn't the easiest set to be on, I can imagine, I'm very glad it exists, and it is touching generations to this very day. The Wizard of Oz is a wonderful movie.
Jesse McAnally, podcaster, director, and idiot on the internet.
So I first saw the movie for the very first time when I was 2. Now this is a legend because of course I have no first-hand memories of this. But apparently at 2 years old when I saw the movie, I was so moved and astounded that I was hooked from that day forward. It's been my sole obsession and focus for a very long time. Since then, I'm now 33, and I started collecting Oz memorabilia when I was 9 and started vlogging about it in 2006, 2007, and now have a 15-year YouTube channel and a TikTok channel during which I talk about all things Oz, and I now go to Oz conventions and co-host events and work with the International Wizard of Oz Club, so it's been a huge, huge part of my life. I think what speaks to me the most about the movie is the idea of found families, the idea of going out into the world, and I think this is what really makes it so universal in the world. I think this idea that we leave home, go out into the world, find our people, take our journeys, and live our lives, that's really what speaks most to everyone. The idea of home being the metaphor of being our whole and complete selves through the people we meet and the things that we do and the achievements we accumulate. It's a story that continues to resonate down the ages because of those universal themes. I think that's why it's stuck with me so thoroughly through all this time and why it will never go away. My first memories of Oz really involve the little plastic posable figures. I remember taking them everywhere and playing with them and acting out the movie. I remember watching the 50th anniversary VHS tape like it was my job, listening to that opening Downy commercial over and over again. Another one of Emily's productions? Yep, fasten your seatbelts. It's so deeply ingrained in me. That soundscape is something that is just so readily available in my memory. Brings such comfort, such joy, such feelings of peace and safety. I don't think it will ever leave me.
Tori Calamito, Oz vlogger and collector. The Wizard of Oz was reissued in theaters nationwide for the first time in the summer of 1949. To MGM's surprise, it garnered an additional $1.5 million for the film's gross. This meant that the studio was finally gaining a profit 10 years later. It would be reissued several more times in theaters. It was released in 1955, probably to capitalize off the fact that the newest Judy Garland vehicle, A Star is Born, had been released just a year prior. It was released again in 1970 and 1972. A remastered version hit movie theaters in 1998 to coincide with a new home video release, and it returned again in 2013. But this time, it received a 3D conversion to celebrate its 75th anniversary. From time to time, the movie still plays in movie theaters across the world. Many people fail to recognize that home video wasn't available at the time The Wizard of Oz was released. After a film played in theaters, it was usually shelved, only to be seen again if it was reissued. That is, until MGM began to lease films to be broadcast on television in the 1950s. MGM signed a contract on August 2, 1956, allowing the CBS network to lease The Wizard of Oz. CBS paid $500,000 for a total of 2 broadcasts. The film was to be broadcast to conclude their Ford Star Jubilee program, a monthly anthology series that premiered on September 24, 1955. Coincidentally, their first program was a Judy Garland music special. It was Judy's television debut, and it concluded with one of her most notable and teary performances of Over the Rainbow, where she sat on the lip of the stage in a tramp costume, reminiscent of Easter Parade. The Wizard of Oz premiered on CBS on November 3, 1956, and its broadcast was hosted by Bert Lahr and 10-year-old Liza Minnelli, daughter of Judy Garland and film director Vincent Minnelli, and show business superstar in her own right. The show also saw an appearance by 13-year-old Justin Schiller, who would incorporate the International Wizard of Oz Club just 2 months later. Nearly 13 million television sets tuned into this 9 p.m. Eastern broadcast, meaning there was an estimated audience of 45 million. It was then believed an earlier broadcast would be more successful to allow more families to watch. A 6 p.m. broadcast took place on December 13, 1959, with pre-recorded host segments from comedian Red Skelton and his daughter Valentina. This particular broadcast was viewed by millions more. CBS broadcast the film annually between 1960 and 1967, until MGM demanded more money for the lease. When CBS wouldn't pay up, NBC decided to broadcast the movie. Its most notable broadcast took place on March 15, 1970, the first time it aired since Judy Garland's death the previous year. CBS reclaimed the rights, airing it annually between 1976 and 1985. For each of these broadcasts, the film received incredible ratings. The annual showings of The Wizard of Oz became a holiday tradition in families across the country, given the fact that it was often aired during the holiday season. Many historians accurately state that, if it weren't for the film's celebrated television broadcasts, The Wizard of Oz would not be nearly as beloved as it is today.
I have been very fortunate to do a lot of Wizard of Oz related work in the last 40 years. Growing up as a fan from the time I was 5 and then starting to write books and work on home video and CDs and DVDs and all that kind of stuff when I was in my late 30s. And one of the great moments happened for me when Warner Brothers sent me to the Deauville Film Festival in France in 2005 to launch one of the DVD incarnations. And there was a press conference with multiple languages going on at the Deauville Film Festival and translators and all, and then one-on-one interviews. And I had one question that caught me off guard. And an interviewer said, at the end of our interview, said, "What does The Wizard of Oz mean to you now?" And it brought me up short, yet my mouth kept talking, and I heard myself say something that I equate to a phrase, "God sends the words." He said, "What does The Wizard of Oz mean to you now?" And I said, "The Wizard of Oz is a passport to my life, because it's been there at every turn. If it weren't for Frank Baum and Judy Garland and MGM and Oz, I would not have had the life, the professional experiences, many of the personal friends that I've had."
John Fricke, Oz historian and author. I was brought up on the books of The Wizard of Oz, and my mother told me that these were great philosophies. It was a very simple philosophy that everybody had a heart, that everybody had a brain, that everybody had courage. These are the gifts that are given to you when you come on this earth, and if you use them properly, you reach the pot at the end of the rainbow. And that pot of gold was a home. And home isn't just a house or an abode, it's people. People who love you and that you love. That's a home. Ray Bolger. The Wizard of Oz had an immediate impact on the entertainment industry. Rumors were spreading as early as 1940 that MGM was pursuing a sequel for Shirley Temple. And although the official film soundtrack wasn't released until 1956, the songs remained ever so popular. In 1942, the St. Louis Municipal Opera, also known as the Muni, commissioned an adaptation of the original Oz novel by L. Frank Baum. With a book by Frank Gabrielson, this stage adaptation is the first to include songs from the MGM film, with the addition of an original song for Dorothy. It is vastly different from the movie, featuring several original characters and some dated material. Yet it has been revised and revived several times since it premiered in St. Louis, and its iterations have starred the likes of Kathy Rigby, Phyllis Diller, and even Margaret Hamilton. A faithful and condensed adaptation of the film was produced for CBS Lux Radio Theater program on December 25, 1950. Judy Garland reprised her role as Dorothy for this broadcast, and the show included a rendition of Over the Rainbow. This became Garland's signature, most requested song. She claimed to never tire of singing it. More discussions were had about Garland's future with the Oz property. Apparently, she was in negotiations in 1961 to reprise her role as Dorothy, but this time as a voice in a cartoon series. This, of course, never materialized, but Garland's daughter, Liza Minnelli, would go on to voice Dorothy in an animated film entitled Journey Back to Oz, which was released in 1972. The popularity of Oz prompted the construction of a theme park, now known as Land of Oz, North Carolina. Debbie Reynolds and Carrie Fisher cut the ribbon, opening the park on Beach Mountain in the summer of 1970. But after 5 years, the Emerald City caught fire, and it had to be reconstructed under new management. It officially closed in the fall of 1980. Many of the original set pieces and attractions have not survived, but the park started reopening for private events in 1988. To this day, the park is open to the public annually in the summer and fall, allowing thousands of fans the opportunity to walk down the yellow brick road. Oz has inspired several other public festivals and annual events throughout the country, including Wizard of Oz Days in Chesterton, Indiana, and OzCon in California. In 1987, the Royal Shakespeare Company produced another stage adaptation, this time resembling the film as closely as possible. Maintaining the film's score, with a book by John Kane, this version is more commonly produced throughout the United States. After premiering in London, it was staged in America the following year, with Kathy Rigby as Dorothy. Notable actors who have starred in this version include Jewel, Nathan Lane, Joel Grey, Deborah Winger, Mickey Rooney, Eartha Kitt, and Joanne Worley. In 2011, the film was adapted yet again on stage in the West End. It has Arlen and Harburg's score, includes new songs written by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice, and a brand new book co-authored by Webber himself. These, of course, are only some of the major influences on Oz media, but the film's impact is truly immeasurable. There are more references in the entertainment industry that can be counted, inspirations found on television, in music and theater. The film's dialogue is often quoted in modern conversation. The value of the movie props and costumes have skyrocketed, some being worth millions. Wizard of Oz merchandise is constantly being created by large and small companies around the world. It's become the version of Oz that every further Oz adaptation must take into consideration. Movies like Oz the Great and Powerful and books like Wicked contain elements that are reminiscent of the 1939 MGM musical, and they're often deemed as spiritual sequels and prequels. The aesthetic of the MGM film has been used in the Marvel DC comic book adaptations from the 1970s, a Saturday morning cartoon from the 1990s, and has been seen more recently as a crossover with the characters from Tom and Jerry, and this only scratches the surface. The Library of Congress has stated that The Wizard of Oz is the most watched film of all time. That's a claim that's not easy to deny. It's hard to come across someone who has never seen the movie. Its masterfully written songs, universally beloved characters, cinematic craft and influence, and, above all, immense heart have created a legacy that has been carried by fans for generations. Sometimes, when I watch the movie, I still get tears in my eyes. It has always been a movie I've taken very seriously. I kid you not, I have every word in the script, every note in the score, and every visual cue committed to memory. It was always so magnetic to me. Despite every fantastical element in the film, it's ultimately about a girl trapped in an unfamiliar place, who goes on an incredible journey with a very specific goal. But that doesn't stop her from taking pauses along the way to help those in need. It doesn't matter what whoever she meets may be personally struggling with, whether they lack brains or heart or courage, whether they look or act a certain way. She thwarts evil, guides the lost, defies fraud, and never once compromises her loyalty or genuinity in the process. The Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion teach us that we are capable of more than we know, so we shouldn't let our own fears and insecurities stop us from reaching our fullest potential. And throughout even the most unbelievable circumstances, Dorothy teaches us the importance of lending a helping hand, being passionate and compassionate, and embracing those who we are told are different. And to me, that is the legacy of The Wizard of Oz.